look at it as a 300-year stretch rather than a 45-year. Leave this thing. It's good in context because we're trying to get a broad framework, and we've been told consistently that there was a rupture in the Enlightenment period that changed in the Western, European, American understanding of rationality and intelligence represents a departure in the historical experience of mankind, and that we know that this view has become globalized and is widespread, and most intelligentsia of the peripheral world are accepting it. And we as Muslims are concerned, we're questioning, should we also accept it blindly, or should we search for our own authentic form, which is maybe different or is more needed for us now? Should we spend, it's like asking the question, should we put our money getting a jet airplane and a tank, or should we build an intellectual institute that teaches certain discipline? I mean, do we want the fruits of technology, or do we want to understand the very nature of what technique is and what humans do? So we're playing with these ideas here. It's very thought-provoking, and your contribution is very interesting and relevant. It's very important.
Thank you. Actually, for my first talk this morning, I actually used Weyrich 2004 and Taggart 2004 articles and Melia 2000, three main papers, all published in Oxford Handbook of Rationality. If you just look at that, Oxford Handbook of Rationality, my main three sources were the introduction by Milley, a paper by Taggart, and a paper by Weyrich.
What's the year of that publication?
2004, I guess, or 2006. I'm not sure. 2004 or 6. I was looking at all papers there, and what to talk about, and I was looking at my notes from my graduate courses on rationality and some of my notes from my studies in Islamic sciences. And what I found in the Oxford Handbook of Rationality, which is a kind of standard handbook now for rationality, is that you have many different discussions about relationship between rationality and, let's say, language, rationality and science, rationality and law, rationality and social sciences, discussions about feminism and rationality. Does feminism necessitate a new kind of rationality? As some people believe that feminism calls for a new form of science because the standard science was not neutral, so the people call for different conception of science based on feminism. And all these kinds of discussions you can find there. But I didn't find any discussion about rationality in religion there. So it's absolutely missing. I think it's a symptom, it's a sign of the mainstream thought about rationality. What they think, how, the possibilities they see for connections is somehow biased, is somehow formed by their previous ideas. I'm not saying, okay, I rephrase that. I do not say biased. I say it's somehow shaped by their other ideas they have. True or false, I don't know. And the reason seems to be what you mentioned. The reason seems to be that there is still some background ideas of, following the old conception.
That religion is irrational.
Maybe I'm not sure how to put it.
To some extent, faith and mysticism, superstition, magic and religion. 200 years ago, magic and religion were mentioned in the same breath. Now we're careful not to say that.
Yeah, it seems to be. Yeah. So there's a concern. Okay. So I just finished this sentence. As far as I can see, the mainstream analytic philosophy is not so willing to link morality and religion to the conception of rationality. Though they may accept that some ingredients therein, like what is self, what is utility, what is within that framework. You know, you still breathe within that framework. Some ingredients can be slightly modified to solve some of our local problems. So this is my take. And perhaps we talk more after the break. Okay. Morton thinks that this overall Bayesian orthodoxy is wrong, but doesn't think that we should put moral or religious virtues in our picture. So I want to talk about the kind of origin of this orthodoxy. One explanation is that Aristotelian logic raised that picture, in the sense that in logic you think that to be rational is to think in a particular way, good ways of thinking, things that guarantee truth. Okay, this is the logical picture. So, well, different ways. So reasoning is the gist of rationality, and the content of reasoning is inference, following inferences. And inferences are divided into inferences divides into different groups: inductive, deductive, so on. So according to this picture, rationality has something to do with inferences. And if inferences cannot help appeal to probability, you know, there are different forms of inference, but well, there's different form of inductive inference. Okay. So what Morton thinks that this is a bad model because you can never find rational decision or rational act based on inferences. And one reason is that when you go ahead in an argument, the number of consequences increases as far as you prove more and more. At each stage, though you gain something, but in a sense you produce more possibilities. So the number of consequences of a set of premises increases rapidly with successive steps of deduction. It means that when you start an argument, you have one premise, you apply a rule, you get the second one, and now you have two premises. So you have more potential to get more consequences, more conclusions. You have more power because you have the rules and you have more premises. You have three premises, you get four, and so on and so forth. So you have more material to produce more conclusions. And in this sense, you should be confused if just finding the most reasonable thing to do is finding one of the consequences, one of the conclusions, sorry. Conclusions are not consequences, so we are talking about conclusions. Christopher Cherniak published the book Minimal Rationality in 1986. It was a very influential book. He distinguished between two things, and distinction is important. You should distinguish between procedures which tell you how to reason, in contrast with procedures that tell us or tell you whether reasoning, once completed, is correct. Okay. Till not long ago, people were thinking that logical rules are rules of thought. People were used to think that when I have mode exponents, for example, if P then Q, P therefore Q, this is a logical rule, and this is at the same time a rule of thought. We think with mode exponents. We think with the rule which says if P then Q, P therefore Q. P people thought that rules to think are logical rules. And still people do think in many contexts this way. I think one of the byproducts of Kerniak's book was to change this picture. No longer people think of logic or logical rules as rules of thought. Put differently, to think rationally is not to follow logical rules. Okay. So logical rules fall under the second category here. There are rules that tell us whether reasoning, once completed, is correct or not. Logical rules are normative in the sense that if you have an argument and if you have logical rules, you can check whether the argument is valid or not. But this does not necessitate thinking that logical rules are the rules that I actually use to think. I actually appeal to, I actually follow them to think. In fact, there's a literature, I don't have it here, there's literature in cognitive science about how to model thinking. It's more in cognitive psychology and cognitive science. There are different traditions there. Some people think that thinking should be modeled by rules. So there are mental rules. But even people who think that there are mental rules do not think that mental rules are logical rules. Okay, so they do not, and there is some data for it. That if you give, I don't remember the source, but the data says that if you give, for example, different logical rules to the agent, the data shows that the agent does not follow logical rules in reasoning. People think in different structure. In particular, there is a logical rule or introduction. I'm not sure if you know. Or introduction means if P is true, P or Q should be true. If today is, I don't know, Saturday, today is Saturday or today is Friday should be true because today is Saturday is true. So today, you can add anything with or. The logical truth doesn't change. Okay? There's data, scientific data that shows that people do not think with this rule. This is just a logical rule, but not a rule of thought. So even in the tradition in cognitive psychology and cognitive science in which people think that thinking should be understood in terms of rules of thought, they do not think that rules of thought are logical rules. In other traditions, for example, people who think that thinking should be understood by models. We do not follow rules in our thinking. We have some models, and we generate models, we cancel models, we work with models in our thinking. This is a very dominant view in philosophy of science, that people think that even scientific theories are models. And also in cognitive psychology and thinking that understanding and thinking should be understood in terms of models. Those people do not respect logical rules either. So logical rules nowadays are not understood as main ingredients of thinking. We give a different job to them, different task. This is why did I say that? This is an example of changing our view because of what we get from cognitive science. So people in the analytic tradition are ready to change their position, for example, about logical rules and their role in understanding and thinking based on what they get from cognitive science. But this is not what we were looking for. This is not an example of a case in which mainstream analytic philosophy changes something because such and such religion suggests that, or because such and such moral values pushing that. So still, I don't see any movement toward that direction. That just was an example of such a feedback from cognitive science.
Maybe the challenge is, not that we want to import a religious way of thinking or rules of thinking, but that we have to express and explain the kind of processes which include thinking processes, but also include intuitive, realizing processes and perceiving, knowing processes, which may be conscious or semi-conscious, in terms which are familiar to moderns, which are now our common discourse. Mm-hmm. So it's not that we have to repeat what Mullah Sadra said because he said it and it must be true, but rather that we can try to understand what he meant and rephrase it in the terms and within the concepts that are shared among us today, even if we have to stretch the concepts or maybe invent a term. Like they're willing to invent terms. So why can't we? We can stretch. Like I often use a phrase, transrational perception. I mean what some people would say would be dhawq or kashf for something. But I don't want to just use a traditional term which would be unfamiliar to non-Muslims and non-Easterners. But if you say transrational perceptive knowing or neptic activity, then they could sort of say, well, I think I know what you mean. I never heard it before, but is there such a thing? You would say, well, you might call it something else in your tradition. But it's talked about in enough different traditions, and there are exemplars who insist that it is a reality and that it can be experienced, that we shouldn't dismiss it. It's not mentation, it's not ratiocination, and it's not logical thinking. But why not? Why can't we bring this into the discussion? And it would be good also that if we insist, let's say as Muslims, that our terms are also valid. We all have to learn what Greek terms are and what English and German terms are, but we can now also insist that others learn our terms. This is a legitimate thing in the global age, in the emerging cosmopolitan age, that we have to make our contribution. So we can say that dhawq can become a term used by non-Muslims as well, and that aql is a term which has valency outside of Islamic circles. If we are clear enough about it, and if we can talk their language while we're clear about our language. But this hasn't happened very much yet, but I can see the possibility. And especially now with these strategic and political and events that have dragged Islam into the focus in the world for the last few decades, Islam has the opportunity by accident to make a contribution because all eyes are on it, more than just being a cause of sensationalism and censure, that they're violent and this and that, Anyway, we need to know what people are thinking and how they express themselves in order for us to have a conversation with them. And we can't demand that they know our terminology. But if we do involve ourselves in conversation, we can introduce our own concepts and say, this is how we say it. And we can try to express it in their terms. And we might even point out the inadequacy of their conceptions to express our notions, for example. We could insist that their thinking about this is not adequate. I believe that Islamic reason has something to offer the modern world, but Muslims aren't aware of it enough because they're not familiar enough with their own tradition to say we have our own experience and understanding of reason, and we should bring it out. But in many ways, some of the advances in Western circles are converging on some aspects of this. For example, the recognition that emotion is part of intelligence is very important. Yeah. And this is part of Islamic ethics and Islamic mysticism. We should be clear about this. We should say, finally you convinced yourself that what we knew all along, or what we forgot too, because we forgot it. 50 years ago, the doctors would say that patients, friends and relatives who visit someone in the hospital should stay outside the room and not disturb them because they might not be ready to receive visitors. Now they know that when the relatives and friends come, they should be in the room and with the patient because it helps the recovery process. But 50 years ago, they didn't realize that, right? Yeah. I mean, that was the modern scientific view at the time, that a visitor would disturb the recovery process. But now they realize they were wrong. And you know what? They recently discovered scientifically that the mother's milk is good for the baby. Now we know scientifically that that's true. As if people didn't know that before, but they didn't have scientific proof of it until recently. But I mean, we don't need to wait for scientific proof for some things. You know, mama's milk is good for the baby. You know, even up to 2 years, according to the Quran, by the way, which is very interesting and important, because it's been tests done. Juvenile delinquents, people who were often bottle fed, never had mother's milk. Mother's milk is good for mental health too, and intelligence. That's another feature I found interesting. If you're breastfed by your mother, you have a higher chance of being more intelligent. You know, it's very interesting, very important.
Actually, I think we agree on many things, and I share a lot with you. I cannot agree more on the point that you said, even we are not familiar enough with our tradition. And I think from my point of view, I put blame more on the shoulder of Muslims rather than non-Muslims. Not because we didn't want to let them know, because we ourselves didn't try to fully understand, grasp, work on, produce, and digest what we had. So I agree on that. On the issues of scientific proof and other things, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the nature of science and scientific proof, and I'm not sure even we have well understood our resources. In particular, it seems that even we Muslims are not sure how to interpret Quran. Even things we have it, and we had it for a long time, when you look at history, we have ignored them. And it's puzzling why. You know, is it that we understood it differently? Is it that we had a reason to disregard it? Is it just accident? You know? So I see the problem more complicated and difficult than I can really answer it or make anything like an answer to. So I share the problem with you, and I'm puzzled why this happened. And I think the problem is deeper when you think that for some cases we don't know exactly how to take care of the issue. For example, when we come to legal and social issues, it seems that Muslims are kind of reluctant to some ideas, or at least the resistance is more visible than cases like breastfeeding and so on and so forth. It seems that people are kind of lack enough confidence in social, cultural matters to bring the issue up, to look at this tradition, Quran, and to clearly, this is important, clearly talk about that.
Even more distressing is that there's an active movement on the part of many Muslims to deny and suppress this aspect of their tradition. As you know, they say philosophy is heretical and mysticism is no good, and people who think outside of a Sharia boundary are somehow suspect, and that's not a privileged form of discourse for Muslims, somehow this fiqhi mentality, and this is like a self-mutilation. They cut their arm off, you know, then they want to work, they want to use their hand, but there's no arm there. This is not anyone else is imposing. And we know what I'm talking about. This is an internal situation. And this influence of this mindset has spread very widely. I work in Malaysia. I mean, you should see how deep inroads have been made in Indonesia and Malaysia about this mindset. It's a very serious issue for us, and most Muslims are unaware of it. It's very, very alarming, the terror of our situation.
Yeah. So Anyone wants to contribute? We were talking in a break about something that your use of fiqh brought to my mind. We were talking about some program in Al-Mustafa, and I was talking that even we don't know that earlier generations of Muslim scholars, faqihs, in ages like in centuries like second, third, fourth, after the generation, after the first generation of Muslims, we don't know really how they took the issue. I believe that we don't have a clear picture of early faqihs and theologians and mutakalims, that how did they take issues of confronting with unknown things, because they had the same situation in a sense. And after first, second century, they encountered Greek culture. They encountered Roman, Persian, and I say after the first one because yes, they somehow they got the Roman and Persian emperor in the first century, but really it took time for them to realize the difference, to see the difference, to come to themselves and think, okay, now they are different from us. How to handle that? Different from in terms of epistemology, values, morality, and other things. So I think even we don't have a clear picture of that era, that what happened there, and then how the kind of early faqih took the issue. Because it seems that something different was going on there. And if that feeling is true, I think we should understand the basis of that truth. We should come back and look at that.
To recognize that there always was, from a very early period, a strong anti-intellectual, anti-rational orientation within the Muslim community, and that it had a long, prolonged existence, and it has been reborn recently and given a new birth, a new lease on life. Hanbali traditionalism. Okay. And they always were a problem, and they were the ones who dictated what is called Sunni orthodoxy, by the way. Anyway.
Yeah, good. I learned from that. Yeah, that's important. Ezra, and then you. Okay, yeah.
I guess I was just curious to hear how is analytic philosophy received here in Iran? What's been your experience here? Are people open to hear this type of discursivity? Just more personal reflections, I guess.
Yeah, good. Analytic philosophy, well, I have been in Iran almost 2 years. Okay, it's not 2 years. So, as far as I can see, first of all, analytic philosophy is not a major discipline yet. Okay, so people do not know that, perhaps. Many people. Even I say people, I mean students of philosophy.
In the West?
No, in Iran. So many students of philosophy in Iran do not know a lot about analytic philosophy. Right. They are not familiar with the ideas. They do not. But there are some institutes that have started perhaps from 10 years ago or something like this, started launching new programs in analytic philosophy, in philosophy of science, in philosophy of mind, cognitive science, but they are pretty new. And perhaps all the students together would not be, more than 50 persons, I don't know. So there are really few students. But it's kind of flourishing programs, kind of now getting some momentum. Okay, so I guess people now are, if you look at the books